Buongiorno e ciao a tutti, I'm Aaron here at 99 Problemi and I'm back with another video. Today this is on the condizionale. A condizionale is a mood, properly speaking, commonly thought of as a tense, but it's a verbal form that's actually considered a mood, and it's going to have a couple different tenses to it. But more on that later. So in this video I'll be talking about the uses of the conditional, the regular forms and endings of the conditional, any irregular forms, and then of course the exercises to show comprehension at the end. Alright, so as I was saying, there are actually two tenses to the conditional. There is the present, which is what this video is about. There's an example, mangerei, I would eat. And there's an example of the past conditional, which is a compound two-verb tense, avrei mangiato, I would have eaten, which you can sort of see as a kind of way of talking about a past counterfactual. The uses of the conditional, the bulk of the uses of the conditional are going to be express the equivalent of the English would. And so that's a challenge for English speakers that commonly think they should have a separate word for would followed by an infinitive. In Italian, the sense of would is actually combined right in a singular verb. Also, it's not limited to would. As its meaning, there are verbs like dovere, to have to, and potere, to be able. These are the modal verbs, in addition to volere, which is also down in the polite forms of address. Those are called the modal verbs, or the verbi servili in Italian, the servile verbs. And dovere and potere, when they're in the conditional, are going to express the very useful words should and could, respectively. Volere will become would like. You can also use the conditional to be more polite. So instead of saying puoi, you could say potresti, could you? And vorrei, I would like, as opposed to voglio, I want. And in addition, you can use the conditional to create a more advanced topic that needs a video to itself called hypotheticals, or hypothetical constructions that employ the imperfect subjunctive. So usually they're only talked about in more advanced Italian, where you need the advanced verbal form of the imperfect subjunctive in order to create them. However, there are some pretty easy examples of this that you can learn earlier that use more predictable verbs, and I'll talk about that a bit at the end. And these are often introduced by se. More on that later. So to begin, the regular conditional stems and endings, let's start off like this. You're going to recognize these if you are familiar with the future tense. They're exactly the same as the future. So if you're an expert on the future, you have half the work to do. Really, all you, I would say even less than that, because you really just have to learn the endings that are associated with a conditional. So if you remember from the future, take a verb like portare, scrivere, and salire as examples. Just chop the e off the end. So that's the first start, and the only change that you need to make to the ARE stem is to change the A to an E. So those are all the irregular stems. You just get porter, scriver, and salire. And the endings for the conditional are esti, ebbe, emmo, which is like the future emo, but this has two M's in it, so watch out for that. Emmo. Voi este and loro ebbero, which is a long ending. And here's what happens when you combine all of this together for these modal verbs. Portare, porterei, porteresti, porterebbe, porteremmo, portereste, porterebbero. And you can see they are quite a mouthful. They have long endings, and the verbs themselves can be quite long. Scrivere and salire follow from that. There are slightly irregular stems that we have to deal with, and these usually occur because of what happens when you apply the rules to make the regular stems. Take, for instance, cercare. Cercare, of course, if you're going to apply the regular rules to this verb, you drop the E and you change the A to an E, and now you would have the verb cercer. Now, if you remember from the present tense, you want to conserve the sound of the infinitive often. So cercare has a hard C sound there. It's a hard, like a K in English, and to conserve that you have to add an H. So we have cercher. Cercare, cercher. Same thing with pagare. You have pagare, hard G, you want to keep that, pager. Otherwise, if you didn't have the H, it would be pager, and so on and so forth. Cominciare with an I becomes comincer. You don't need the I and the E together to make that cer sound. Mangiare, manger. Lasciare, lascer. And then the exception would be something like sciare. These are rare, where you keep the I. And the reason that you keep the I in the verbs that would normally act like verbs like lasciare verbs, is because if the verb is in the present, first person present, take a look at that form. Like, you would say scio if you wanted to say I ski. Or another example is inviare, to send. So invio. Now, if you look at that, is the I emphasized? Do you need it there? And indeed you do. You have scio. Hear how the I is emphasized? You need to keep that in order to conserve the sound of the verb. So that's why that I is conserved in verbs like sciare and inviare. But those are pretty rare, and you just have to be attentive if you're going to use those verbs often. And then when you add the conditional endings, it's just the same as you did with the regulars. Moving on to the irregular conditional stems, they're the same stems again as the future. So I'm not going to spend too much time looking at these. You're going to have to do the brunt of the work to memorize these. And they do take time. However, if you're speaking often with native speakers or practicing with somebody who's an expert on these things, that can be a lot more effective than just sitting down and trying to memorize these. So the more you use them, the better, the more permanent they become in your mind. And for what that's worth. Now on to the exercises in this video. Let's start off with a verb like volere. Io volere. That becomes vorrei. Now that's a very useful verb. You're going to see that constantly when you go to the coffee shop and you say vorrei un caffè. It's a very useful verb. You can use that to be polite. Alright, so why don't you pause it here and go through these exercises, and anytime you see that magenta dash, you're going to make that into a negative. And with a conditional, it's just like any other. That's just like any other verb conjugation. When it's negative, you're going to put a non in front of the verb. And there's a couple of reflexives in there, and they act exactly like the regular conjugations for reflexives. Okay, so why don't you pause it, write these out, and then unpause it, and I'll give you the answers. Okay, number 2, potere is one of these that drops the E entirely to make the stem. This one is potresti, could you. 3, they, a negative form of finire, so this is non finirebbero. 4 is a reflexive example, and that's what this one would look like. It's mi alzerei. 5 is andremo. 6 is sapreste. You all would know. 7, sarebbero. They would be. 8, non studierebbe. 9 is one that conserves the I sound. This one is scierei. 10 is non farei. 11, non verrebbe. 12 is non daresti. 13 is direbbe. 14, mangerei. 15, canteresti. 16 is berrebbe. 17 is loro vedrebbero. 18, si sveglierebbe. She would get up. 19 is guarderemmo. 20 is tornerebbero. Okay, the last thing that we're going to do here is to look at something called the hypothetical, and we're going to look at it briefly, and this is should be the subject of its own video later on when you know how to form the imperfect subjunctive. So with the hypothetical, what you're going to do is what you often can do with this at an earlier level is to answer, you know, simple hypothetical questions that involve verbs like the forms of avessi and fossi, which is avere and essere respectively. Okay, it becomes a little bit more difficult when you have to form it with other verbs, but so let me just pose these questions to you, and you can sort of answer them however you might like. But it's a couple of good hypothetical questions here, like cosa faresti se tu avessi 100.000 euro? And so how would you respond to that? So the way that I respond to that, I'll tell you in a second, but so pause it here, take a couple seconds to think about these hypotheticals. What might you say? And can use the conditional to do it. And you can use a lot of things, possible responses with a conditional, but here's one that I used. So 100.000 euro, be a nice down payment on a house. You could say comprerei una bella casa. And se fossi in te, if I were you, there's a common expression that you should know. Se fossi in te, viaggerei il mondo. I'd travel the world. Okay, so 2 possible responses to that. Be interested to hear what you guys have as your responses to these hypotheticals. So if you want, you can actually write them in the comments below. Alright, grazie tante, that's all I have on the conditional mood. And if you have any questions, write them in the comments. Send me a message. You can also find me online at 99problemi.com, or you can find me on Facebook at 99problemi and at Twitter as well at 99problemi, the handle. Ok, grazie tante, ciao!